Wow. Hello. Wow. So I'm starting the live stream a bit early, because it's currently like 9:30 where I am, 9:30 p.m. So I thought if I started it at 10, I would end it at 11 and then I would be extremely sleepy by then. So I thought it would be better to start the live stream earlier. Yeah, because I have to wake up early tomorrow morning and I don't wanna shortchange on my sleep. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Wow, okay, there's a few of you. Apologies for the really bad camera. I only have the inbuilt webcam, so this is pretty much the quality that I'm stuck with. I hope the audio is still okay though, because I am using my usual external mic, which is this Blue Yeti mic over here. So, I hope it's fine. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of crazy. I feel like my channel kind of had a lot of views the past few days, especially the past week. I was at about 8K subs, and then the past week sort of made it jump to about 10K. So I use a camera, the Canon 70D, I think. It's a pretty old model. I think it's like I don't know, maybe it's like, I think 6 or 8 years old kind of model. I got that camera about 5 years ago now. Yeah, so it's a really old camera. It's a DSLR. I can just take it, I guess. Yeah, this is the camera that I normally use. It's a 70D. Yeah, it's it's really old. I used it like, I bought it 5 years ago secondhand from someone that I think was just experimenting with camera gear, but eventually they wanted to sell it off because they weren't using it enough. And I got it for a pretty good deal. I think I got it for about 1,000, including gear and the camera bag. Yeah, and I'm still using the camera until today, so it's a pretty good model. Although I have to then use an external mic because this doesn't have an inbuilt mic, or at least it does, but it's very poor quality. So that's what I have to make do with. Oh yeah, thank you. I really thought like the quality was subpar, because at first I was using this camera and then I was using my iPhone to record the audio, because that's a trick that I learned from some other YouTubers. But then I invested in this Blue Yeti mic, and I think it was a really great investment because it seems like the audio quality really matters a lot when it comes to making videos, more so than the visual, like the visual quality. So yeah, I really, really enjoy this mic a lot. Oh, thanks for that, King of Pointless. Okay. Yeah, this is my first time actually doing a live stream. I think it's okay, it's my second ever live stream on this channel. Um, but the first live stream that I did was like really a long time ago. I think I did it when I only had like 100 subs or something. And I was just doing it just to try it out. Wow. Yeah, I'm really very surprised that the videos I've made have gone out to so many people. I would say this is super rare because I'm based in Singapore, and it's not very often that you see Singaporean content being pushed out to such a wide audience. I do think it's because the topics that I tend to deal with are a bit more international, whereas like a lot of local YouTubers in Singapore tend to do very localized content. Yeah, so I think it's been really crazy to think about the growth in my channel. I don't know what to do about it most of the time. I just feel like it's sort of evolved. It started out just from a booktube channel because I was reading a lot of books. But eventually, I think I started to touch on topics that people seem to be really interested in. Yeah, and a lot of people have sort of feedback that they would like to see more of that kind of content, which is amazing. Oh, Crazy Like Us is a really good book. I really recommend it. Uh, I do think in general in the publishing sector or just generally readership in books, not a lot of people question the sort of Anglo-centric perspective a lot. I think Crazy Like Us, it's about the globalization of mental health diagnosis and psyche. And I thought that for a collection of writings to address that was really refreshing because I did study psychology back in uni. I was a psych major until I declared otherwise, and um, it struck me how much people didn't question the kind of cultural assumptions in a lot of these like mental health studies or at least any of these psychological studies like that people were trying to replicate results without really understanding that yeah, people actually experience psychological states really differently in many different cultures. So that's a book I would really recommend. I think it's Crazy Like Us by Andrew. Let me go and search it up. Oh, it's by Ethan Waters. It's a really good book. I read it like 3 years ago now, I think. Oh, 3 years ago. It's one of the books that really convinced me to switch out of a psych major, actually. Oh my god, thanks for all the comments. Do I make notes before I chat to the camera? It's really a mix, I think. Normally, when it's just a bookish video, I tend not to make too many notes because I kind of go by chronological order. So I just go by the books that I read that month or the books down the list, and I just talk about my general thoughts about them. But I do keep a book journal, which I haven't been updating. When I read a book, afterwards I tend to reflect on what I learned from it. But nowadays I haven't been super consistent with that. I should get back to it, but oftentimes after I read a book, the lessons stay in my head, and then when I do a video, I don't really have to make notes. But if it's a video that's a bit more idea focused, a bit more conceptual, then I do make notes. So I think the video that a lot of people watched in the past month was the I do not, the ambition one. So I did do a outline for that video because there were a lot of separate points that I really want to touch on. And I think with the first video that went a bit more viral, the I do not dream of labor video, there were a lot of points that I missed out in that video that I wish I could have included in that video, actually. It's only after I published it and I started to watch a lot of people's responses to the video that I realized that, oh, yes, actually, there are all these points that I agreed with, but I wasn't able to include them in my video because I was kind of just going off the top of my head. Yeah, so nowadays I do try to plan my videos as much as I can, but a lot of it is unscripted. A lot of it is sort of stream of consciousness situation. Left wing YouTube of EcoTube. That's a very interesting niche, I think. That's very cool. I think ecotube is a very cool term. Definitely, I am looking forward to sort of ideas about ecology and ideas about the climate and the environment to become a lot more mainstream. I am a big believer of making things mainstream, of making radical ideas, I guess, to some extent, making them interesting and popular because, it's no point staying underground. What you want is to have good ideas come out to the public, into the masses, and incorporate themselves in society in a good way. So the more things become cooler, good ideas, that would be great. Wow, good morning from Austin, Texas. Well, it's evening now it's not even evening, it's like nighttime now in Singapore. So almost 10 p.m. now. The Power of Now. No, I've not read that book. Yeah. 100th anniversary of novel Bambi. Oh, that's so interesting. So, as an environmentalist fiction book. Hmm. Wow, actually, that is very interesting. That's very cool. I do think I'm pretty new to like environmental fiction or climate fiction, which is the last video that I made. So I've talked about climate fiction. Yeah, so I think that would be very cool to actually look at classics and to look at them from the lens of today, from a very much like modern environmentalist lens. That'll be very cool. I mean, that's kind of similar to how um, queer studies have sort of gone about doing a lot of their analysis, sort of reinterpreting texts in a queer way. That's one thing that I really, really enjoy. So it'll be really cool to also bring that lens, that kind of ecological thinking to classics. That will be actually really cool. Um, how did I end up studying anthropology in college? That is really okay. It's a really long story. So, some of you might know, but I think a lot of you are new to the channel and new to me. I used to be okay. I used to be really convinced that I was a science person, like a sciencey person. I always thought that I would do something relating to biology. At one point, I even considered doing neuroscience. And so my first 2 years in college was very much okay, I want to learn about human behavior, but through a psychological lens. Because growing up, all I knew was like psychology as the human behavior studies discipline. But then when I went to school, there was a major, that anthropology, that was offered, which I then took a few modules in my sophomore year. And that's when a lot of things clicked for me because I think I was always someone that had a soft spot for literature and the humanities. I always was interested in history, geography, all those things. I just never admitted it. And in Singapore, there's only one college that offers anthropology, which is Yale US College. I don't know if anyone knows about that school. It's a relatively new school here in Singapore. And so it was completely new. I know that a lot of countries, anthropology is pretty standard, but in Singapore, if you say that you study anthropology, like no one knows what it is. There's a small chance that people might know what it is, but oftentimes they don't. And I was just really intrigued. I think because I was super interested in gender studies, I was really, really interested in feminist issues. Anthropology was the most straightforward way of studying that, like studying gender relations and studying cultural assumptions, which I realized was something that I really enjoyed because I always felt like I was a in between kind of cultural hybrid. I always felt like there was a lot of questions about culture that a lot of people weren't questioning. And I realized that this was a much more better fit for me because I was lying to myself thinking that I was like, completely scientific. I realized that there was so much more to science that people weren't addressing. So, yeah, that's how I kind of dropped into anthropology. it was kind of like the riskiest decision because I switched majors right before my senior year. So that was like the very last moment I could switch my major, and I did. Okay. Okay, wait, there's so many comments. Oh yeah, I do not dream of labor trend. It was really like I don't know. I just felt like it was a really strange coincidence. I mean, I did want to make a video on it nonetheless, but I really didn't expect it to blow up really at all. Really because of my circumstances, like being a creator that's not based in the US. And also doing niche videos about books. I really never thought that that video would ever reach anyone. So I'm really glad that a lot of you seem to appreciate my perspective, because that's really crazy. Because I'm just this one small person. I'm literally small. I'm like shorter than 160 cm. So yeah, and I do think that there is a growing sentiment questioning capitalism, which is great. It's not as contentious as it used to be, I think, many years ago. I think a lot more people are starting to be okay even with questioning the status quo, which is a huge step, I think, in any sort of situation. Hi from the Philippines. Hello. I'm guessing you are in the same time zone as I am. So, good evening. Um, wait. Hmm? Okay. Any resources to recommend for someone who wants to self-learn anthropology? That's a good question. I would say that anthropology today um, is actually really broad, and I think that's a good thing. I do think that nowadays, okay, like I guess very traditional anthropology is very like colonialist. It's a very like a um, othering sort of discipline. But if you want to self-learn anthropology, you can definitely start from sort of googling what areas of anthropology you'd be interested in, because that basically anthropology is just a field of inquiry, and there are so many anthropologists that apply like anthropological practices to so many other disciplines. And I would say don't limit yourself to like just the discipline of anthropology, because I think even in a lot of very new or like contemporary disciplines, even think like urban studies, they do use ethnographic practices in their research. So from what I think, like I would say try maybe I know I would recommend like maybe things like ethnographic books would be a great place to start, and then maybe you can then search out like, oh wow, this kind of topics you're interested in. Yeah, ethnographic accounts. There's so many of them. The one I remember is like the mushroom at the end of the world. I think it's a really well written multi-species sort of ethnographic book. Yeah. If not, I would say anthropology books. Maybe I should compile a list of books for that, because I do think that some of the books tend to be quite academic and not very easily accessible if you've not had like prior basic exposure to anthropological thinkers. Oh, hi, how am I doing? I'm doing all right. Yeah, it's like the middle of the week, and honestly, like I was a bit tired earlier in the day, but now I'm okay, I think. Okay, so how do I avoid being nihilistic, especially regarding climate change? This is something that I deal with almost every single day. So, like, even earlier today, Singapore kind of reported really heavy floods. Okay, not really heavy floods, heavy rains that have resulted in floods in certain areas. And, these floods are not new, it's just that they've been happening a lot more frequently lately. And generally people around me still believe that climate change is kind of far away. A lot of people don't really behave as though there's like a crisis. Um, Sorry about that, just sneezed. Um, yeah, I think it's kind of hard. I would say being in the present helps the most, and knowing that there are still things that you can do today that you can enjoy. And I realized that like being too hard on yourself doesn't really help anyone. I used to guilt trip myself like so much, and I used to feel as though like I was doing everything wrong. For example, like me going to a plant-based diet, like if that day there was a dish that actually had meat in it that I wasn't aware of, I would feel so bad about it that I ate it. But I think nowadays I just kind of feel like we just have to do what we can do, and that we just have to make sure that more and more people can relate to what you're feeling. I feel like that's the biggest obstacle that I face right now. It's like I feel like if more and more people understood what kind of situation we're in right now, that we wouldn't have to feel so hopeless, or that even just the mere understanding of the timeline of things can really be very comforting. Actually, there's this newsletter called Gen Dread, GENDREAD, I think, and it's about precisely this ecological anxiety, or like yeah, eco anxiety, and all these sort of yeah, like specifically climate crisis induced anxieties. And that newsletter has been really helpful, I think, because it does have a lot of insights from, I guess, even therapists or like psychologists that do take into account the current climate crisis. So that has been really helpful as a resource. I hope that helps as well. Oh, someone asked whether I'm single. Well, I shall not answer that question. Well, I do. Well, So someone asked, do you think it's ever possible to transmit to the public the importance of climate change? Will anyone care unless the consequences are significant loss of food sources? Okay, that's a really good question, and I really feel like okay, like the worst case scenario is yes, like people are not going to believe it until it affects them directly. And I think the problem is that a lot of us live in um, cities. A lot of us live in very complex, I guess, even urbanized areas where we do not see the fragility of our webs, like our interdependence with other things. So, for example, like in Singapore, a lot of our stuff is imported in, and a lot of I think on the daily, I don't think Singaporeans really think about where our stuff comes from. Like we just assume that if the store is stocked, it will be stocked forever. So I also feel it's kind of tied in with this alienation from where things are sourced from, or even even really relating to back to our connection to the land. I think a lot of us, because maybe for example gardening, people might not really have experience knowing how to grow a plant, and then they would not realize that actually to produce food actually takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of time, and hence to be able to produce food on demand in such quantity actually requires a lot of resources, and actually requires a lot of um, really a lot of parties involved. And if one party, say for example one factor is affected by climate change, for example, then the entire supply chain kind of gets disrupted. But the fact is that we don't ever think about this, because as a consumer we're just taught to be able to expect um, stuff immediately and without any consequence. I think that will be really hard to overcome, I feel, unless people are directly impacted. For example, I think in Singapore, people are not really going to care about um, about temperatures rising, etc., until like basically our food sources are threatened because of it, which is a really sad scenario to think about, I think, because we are pretty much sheltered from understanding the real impacts of the climate crisis. Yeah. Hmm. What's this? Uh, did I ever consider majoring in sociology? Hmm. No, my college did not offer sociology. So they offered anthropology as well as like uh, I think they offered like politics, philosophy, and economics, but I wasn't interested in that at all. Mm. Yeah, trying to take a decolonial perspective is really, really useful. I think in a lot of books that I've been reading, even if they're not environmental books, so many books I think in contemporary thought um, argue for the requirement or like argue for the fundamental questioning of colonial perspectives. And I think that's kind of like the progress that we have to take, or kind of like the unraveling of things. There's this book called Degrowth. No, it's called, oh, it was this book that I was really recommending so much. I can't believe I forgot the title. Oh, okay. It's called Less is More: How Degrowth Will Save the World. I think this is the book that kind of I talked about in my degrowth video. And I really enjoyed this book because it was really it's quite an accessible book, so it's not too jargony, and it kind of ties in ideas of decolonization as well as questioning imperialism and neo-imperialism. It also questions a lot about what we think about economic growth and how that's actually tied to our kind of separation from the land or separation between nature and nature and man, nature and human, nature and culture. Sorry. So the nature and culture debate is one of the mainstays of anthropology. And Jason Hickel is an anthropologist. So yay for anthropology. I mean, this was the first time that I was reading an anthropology of the economy, which is really cool. I think David Graeber as well was an anthropology professor. He also published many amazing books about economics, about the economy. Um, One of them, which is Bullshit Jobs, I think a lot of people read that and started to question about the value of their own work. And what I really like about his writing is that it's also very accessible. So I'm really grateful that there are all these anthropologists that are taking their anthropological thought and making it a lot more public. Yeah. Podcast recommendations. Unfortunately, I have not been listening to a lot of podcasts. In Singapore, I do listen to this podcast called Something Private. It talks a lot about women's issues in the region, which is a great podcast if you're interested in, I guess, Southeast Asian women perspectives. Uh, yeah, I think another one that I've been listening to is How to Save a Planet. Yeah, it's basically about climate solutions. It's very US centric, but it's a starting point, I think. Oh, the How to Listen to Yourself video. Thank you so much for watching that because um, I really enjoy making videos like that as well, where it's a bit more spiritual, I guess, or like a bit more personal, because I am a huge advocate for kind of developing your sense of self and being very bodily aware. I do think that that's often overlooked. A lot of people, when they think about self development, they think about like their mental and emotional development. But I do think like your bodily awareness or like your bodily appreciation a huge part of your like yeah like your self, your sense of self. So yeah. The Silent Spring, yes, I've heard about it so much. I've not actually read it, but I definitely do think it is essential reading. A lot of people seem to think it is, so I will be picking that book up. Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot about it, especially because it was written so long ago. Wow, okay, there's so many questions going on. What's happening? Any thoughts on the relative value of formal university education? Wow, I really have a lot of thoughts about this because I mean, my videos have always been about like self-directed learning, which has been really fulfilling. But I do know it also comes with a lot of like it also comes with a lot of privilege because I am able to access all these books, and I'm also able to have had an education, like a uni education that exposed me to these ideas from the start and then teach me the ways, oh yeah, and the education that actually taught me the ways to engage with these texts and ideas in a more critical way, because I feel like if I wasn't able to go to uni and to learn from professors and to get introduced to those ideas, I don't know whether my self-directed learning would have been this fruitful. And I think that's the dilemma that I feel a lot as well, because as much as I want to advocate for like everyone to read, because I think that's something that everyone should be able to access. And I don't think that, you know, thoughts and ideas and being able to develop your own opinions, I don't think that's something that should be gate I don't know, gatekept institutions. I myself didn't do very well in uni. Actually, I didn't perform very well academically as a student. I think it was really stressful for me to keep up with academic expectations, like writing an essay, etc., etc. But at the same time, it was an education that gave me a lot of material. It gave me a lot of very stimulating classroom experiences for me to very safely engage with a lot of much more abstract and much more, I would say, like faraway topics that I really wouldn't have engaged in on a normal basis. And because of that, then I was able to cultivate an interest in all this. So I feel like it's terrible um, to to have institutions like formal education being so inaccessible for such a huge part of the population and of society, really. I think even in Singapore, uni admissions is capped at a certain level, and a lot of people don't know this. But I know this is not an uncommon practice. I guess the best that we can do is to really like share that knowledge through whatever means we have. And I do know that there is an increase in a lot of these like educational content on YouTube, but I also want to say that it's you have to take it with a pinch of salt as well, because not everyone that you see online is a credible source. For example, I'm just sharing my perspectives, and if people are gonna hold me to the level of a professor or to a level of like a intellectual, um, I really don't think that's like very fair in some ways, because I do think that everyone should think of themselves as an intellectual in some area. Like everyone is engaging in a kind of conversation on par with one another. And I shouldn't be saying things that, if I say they are true, then not everyone else has to automatically accept it as it's true. I do think that it's good to have a conversation and to bring that to, like, I guess, a much more accessible platform like YouTube. Yeah, so that's what I think about it. Does that make sense? I think it's very rambly. Okay. Can you talk about going on a plant-based diet in a video? Yes, I definitely want to do that. Yeah, I struggle a lot with making videos that aren't sit down and talk videos because I literally only have this DSLR and it's so bulky. And it only allows me to record videos in very small files. So I'll have to figure out a way to record vlogs that aren't too low quality, I hope. Oh, sorry. What's happening in the comments? Do we as humans have functioning systems that can solve a problem like climate change that requires collective, coordinated global action? Man, that's a really difficult question. I mean, the UN is supposed to serve that function, but I think by now everyone sort of knows that they don't really have that much of a negotiating power over governments, and that's a very frustrating part. I do think that coordinated global action seems so impossible in a world where so many of the leaders are very much focused on, uh, yeah, like prioritizing their own economy. I don't know whether we will see government leaders who would prioritize a global perspective or like a global kind of approach to things. I mean, in the end, like for example, I guess major superpowers like the US, for example, they would still only push for policies that would help secure a certain kind of position for their own country. So okay, this is already in the realm of politics, and I think that's really difficult to answer. I do think that there's this book called The Ministry of the Future that's written by Kim Stanley Robinson, and he puts forth this really interesting scenario where the Ministry for the Future is a sort of like UN-like body that has been sort of put together precisely to mitigate the climate crisis for the future, which is why they call it the Ministry for the Future. I feel like if you're interested in whether that's a very feasible scenario, yeah, I think you should try and read the book. I think it outlines a pretty interesting scenario, which I would say has its own caveats as well. I would say that would be a really good first step if we can actually have a UN like body that is very much specifically for the climate crisis, because the UN is solving so many things. Yeah. Well, there are many different bodies. I mean, the IPCC report is just the report, and then they kind of just ask the governments to do their own take on the report. So there isn't anyone that's really like enforcing these governments to do anything about it. Okay. Do you feel hopeful or pessimistic for our future? Um, Dude, I really kind of, how do I say this? Like, I really swing between really hopeful and really pessimistic on a daily basis. It's not very good for my mental health. At one point, I think sometime a few months ago, I was really, really, really in a very negative headspace. But then it started to have really bad consequences for my relations to other people. For example, like I would get really irritable easily, or I wasn't really allowing myself to enjoy my time. I think that's when I realized that it's not good to be completely pessimistic. And I think at that point I was reading Rebecca Solnit's book. I think it's called Hope in the Dark. And even though it wasn't specific to the climate crisis, the book was about how there were a lot of these political movements in the past, and how, it is a really important job to be able to inspire hope amidst all this crisis. And when I read that book, I realized that, dude, I really need to find a way to cultivate a sustainable source of hope or inspiration or something like that. It isn't so good to be running off anger or pessimism all the time. I feel like anger is good as an energy source, but in the long run, you want to be able to have something to look forward to. And I think there's this quote, I think, I don't know who it's by, but it's about how, one should make the revolution irresistible, and that you should make it a very joyous celebration. You should make it something that people want to opt in and not feel like they're sacrificing things. You want people to feel as though they are building towards a better future. And that is much more convincing than telling everyone that it's all about doom and gloom. I think it's really tried and tested. For example, when I was trying to get people around me to try meat alternatives like plant-based stuff, a lot of them were like, "Oh, I can't quit meat. I can't give up on life's pleasures." But once they started trying all these different things and realizing that, oh, I can be a lot more creative with these plant-based recipes. I can experiment new things. I can find new flavors. I can, reinvent my favorite family recipes without using meat and still enjoy it. And that's when it's the most convincing. So I think from that experience, I try to be a bit more motivated by hope, but it is difficult, definitely, and I do spiral a lot. So, yeah, I would say I feel hopeful only if I see some major changes in the next 5 years. Now it's conditional. I feel like I will only really feel hopeful once I start to see concrete changes being done. Wait, what is happening? Okay. Have I lived abroad? Uh, okay, so my family is from Indonesia, so I have not lived in Indonesia before. I've lived in Singapore all my life, but we do go back often, at least before the pandemic. So I kind of shuttled between two countries at some point. Um, Other than that, I have actually lived in Seoul for 3 months doing an internship. Yeah, and I studied Korean for a bit. And I also did a semester exchange program in Japan, in Tokyo, studying, yeah, studying visual culture, things like that. So I haven't done any long term international living abroad things, but I have spent a short amount of time in other countries before, mostly in Asia. Yeah. Okay, this is a really good question. How do we practice degrowth without going to poverty? This is a really, really good question. I don't have the answer for this. I myself am trying to figure how the economics will work. I'm still watching so many things and reading so many things about degrowth. And I feel like precisely because so much of our daily needs are premised upon um, the usual business model, which, yeah, prioritizes growth, right? I feel like then it becomes very much, how do I say this, a very convoluted pathway. So instead of like a person-to-person sort of transaction, oftentimes now the transactions between a consumer and a major, I guess, like producer, and that transaction necessitates a lot of conditions, even if that transaction is for an essential item or an essential service. I feel like what I know now is really about removing that condition for eternal economic growth, and then measuring the success or the development. It's not even development. Sort of finding other ways to divert the money. So instead of trying to produce more money into the system, it is about diverting or I guess reassessing where all the money is going. So this could be in the short term, reassessing budgeting. I think even like state budgets, governmental budgets, and I guess even in the long term, I'm that's why I'm trying to figure out how would it work in the long term. Um, is it possible to maintain the world and to even improve the world without producing more money, without producing more things? Would it be possible to close an entire loop of all these things without the need of creating more? Which I think that would be a really, really interesting thing to explore, not just in economics, but also a lot of our mindset. I would really want to put a disclaimer that I find that my knowledge about economics is still very lacking. There are a lot of other people who have studied economics that know how markets work a lot better and know how economic development works a lot better. I feel like it's not really my area of interest, but definitely it is a major concern. How do we make sure that that there is still improvement, right? There is still um, facilities that can be built for the people. How do we make sure that services and goods still can circulate without the need for increase in economic output? And yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many things to think about, but that's definitely a very good question. Yes, definitely. Yeah, thanks so much for staying in this live stream. And don't forget about disabled people and their needs. Definitely so. I think that's so important. I think, right, like I think a lot of books that I've read recently that talks about mutualism and cooperation, it's really about understanding that there is no normative standard of things, that everyone is very much different in their own ways, and that everyone deserves to be able to contribute in their own ways, and that everyone is entitled to a thriving life in their own capacity, and that it would be a meaningful life as well. So I would say building towards an inclusive society is very much aligned with building a sustainable world, and also building a much more ethical world as well. So yeah, thanks so much for staying in this live stream. You contributed a lot in the comments, so yeah. How do I think about Donald Trump and Joe Biden? To be very honest, I don't really keep up with the specifics of US politics. Um, yeah, I would say definitely it's a really good thing that Donald Trump is not a president anymore, but I'm in no position to say whether Joe Biden is a lot better. I feel like you should look to other perspectives for that, because yeah, I'm not really interested in that. Someone okay, okay, I know that there was this discussion about the purpose of life. I would say it's a really age-old question, a really age-old discussion. I myself am trying to figure out that as well. What is the real purpose of being human? I feel like that's something that religion can answer for you. I do think it is a very human quality to question our purpose and our existence. But I can't answer that for you, because I feel like that would be me trying to preach a much bigger message than I and what I'm comfortable with. So yeah. Good question though. I think about that a lot. Have I watched the Vlog Brothers' latest video? Yes, I do think it's really done well. I think it's really simple, very digestible. Um, but I also will say that it's very US centric again. Then again, so much of climate discourse is very, very US centric. And I know a lot of data and stats out there is about how the US economy or like the US, I guess, general society is very, very, very much complicit in all of this, which I'm glad that there are people addressing that. I'm glad that people are trying to move the US society to think about these issues and to act on them. I think no matter what, their influence in the world is unmistakable. But at the same time, I do hope that people understand that when they watch all these videos, that they're aware of how US-centric these perspectives are. Um, it's good for a general viewer, but I would love to see more content creators talking about how the climate affects people beyond the US. That's something that I haven't seen a lot, I think. The problem is that local economies are tied to global economies. Definitely agree. That's a very huge, very huge untangling. Isn't There's a very huge thing to untangle and to try to figure out a better way to do things. Because the fact is that global economies, the world is still going to be very much interdependent. The fact is, how do we become globally connected um, in a way that does not, um, yeah, in a way that does not exploit other people? Yeah. Because I do think that when we think about globalization, or the way that globalization was so highly regarded back in its heyday, I guess like in the 90s or whatever, the benefits was only seen the benefits were only seen in certain parts of the world, mainly like the Western worlds. And there was this whole narrative that it was giving jobs to people, which is true to some extent, but it also made these workers extremely dependent and reliant on all these major like the major intervention of all these corporations. So yes, on the surface, a lot of jobs were created, a lot of money was being pumped in, but there were also some trade-offs, and the interests of the more, I guess, developed world will always be prioritized over the interests of the lesser developed world, which is something that I hope people would be a lot more willing to complicate now, I think, especially now that China is becoming very huge. I think that has made a lot of people question perceptions about, yeah, like non-US countries. What's my favorite coffee drink? Wait, I love this question. Thanks for asking me this question. Well, I love a good filter coffee. That's my favorite to prepare. But I would say my guilty pleasure is an espresso in tonic water. It's very good. Do you think the rightward turn in economic thinking has benefited the world in general? I sense there's a lot of burnout around capitalism in the West. Uh, I feel like this is very, how do I say, this kind of question, it kind of reminds me of when people ask questions like, oh, wasn't colonialism good? It brought a lot of education, it brought a lot of civilization, it brought a lot of infrastructure, etc., etc. And it's true. The fact is that in history, we cannot really argue otherwise. I think there's something a lot of historians will tell you, like you can't argue otherwise. Like you can't be like, oh yeah, the converse was better, or maybe like the alternative was better, because no such alternative could have been proven, right? Because it already happened. So I would say you know, it's a debate or an argument that's I wouldn't say it's very productive to have to think about whether the past economic development was actually overall beneficial to the world. The fact is that it has happened and it has led to certain positive outcomes and it also has led to a lot of negative outcomes. And it's our job now to mitigate the negative outcomes and to reconfigure things so that they would lead to more positive outcomes. I feel like that's the only kind of realistic approach we can have right now. So yeah, I wouldn't want to say yes overall imperialism or colonialism was a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing, but it happened anyway. So there's no point trying to argue that it had positive benefits. Does that make sense? What is degrowth? Degrowth is about uh, removing the notion of economic growth as this essential narrative or like growth. I mean, I would say very generally it's about growth as the necessity to progress. Yeah. How old am I? I am 24. Thanks all for the really nice comments. Political philosophy. I've not touched that. I don't know what that would constitute. What kind of thinkers would that constitute of? You mean like talking about like different politics? Like, I don't know. Are you intimidated by the parasocial relation of a platform? Definitely so. This is all very new to me. I think earlier this year I did do a video about being online and how I've started to reckon with my persona as a content creator. I am not like I am not completely comfortable still with the idea of being a content creator. It still feels very strange that people watch my videos and resonate with them. Um, I also have encountered certain comments from people have made who have made me feel like I didn't do a good enough job of things. And I think having constructive criticism is really good. But I do think that there is certain expectations for content creators to some degree to cover all ground or to be able to respond to the needs or like the sort of interests of the general public and the audience. Yeah, this is something I haven't really fully reckoned with, but definitely I do think that it will be a point of tension for me moving forward as my channel starts to grow. So a lot of people use what happened previously to justify continuing the same damaging systems. That's really quite upsetting. Just because things have been done a certain way, so things should be done a certain way. I'm very, very, very familiar with that, especially in Singapore. I mean, that's basically how the political systems here are run. Status quo is always better than the unknown. Yeah, basically. And that's kind of I wouldn't say I'm surprised by that sentiment. I would say then, in order to counter that, we need a lot of risk takers who are willing to explore all these areas and to kind of provide a very cushy and very attractive um, alternative. Because the fact is that I think, okay, I sort of learned this through experience in a very you know, in a civil service job. So basically, I was in a civil service job. I was a civil servant, and I realized that there were a lot of things that I couldn't do in that job. But at the same time, I recognized that it wasn't the job of a civil servant to do those things. It wasn't in the interest of the bureaucracy to try new things and to challenge themselves. It was going to be from a position of the outside where I can push and question and prod until things start to change in the mainstream. And then, yeah, and then afterwards, the bureaucrats and the systems will respond. So that's sort of my approach now. Previously, I did think that working within the system would be a good thing. And I think it really depends on your skills. It really depends on your capacity. Yeah, because I do think that right now when I'm young and I have um, these things I want to talk about, it would be yeah using my capacity to do other things rather than to yeah work things through in the status quo. What are some of the places you love to travel to after the pandemic? Okay, I mean, okay, this is a very like sweet question. I think a lot of people do have this wanderlust. Um, for me, I've never really enjoyed traveling. Actually, so I don't really miss it. I don't really miss traveling. Um, but I would say I really, really hope that, um, say, for example, my family can go back to Indonesia to see our relatives because it's almost been 2 years, I think, since we last saw them in person as a whole big family. So, yeah. Why do you read books instead of living life? Why create thoughts of imagination when you can experience them in the moment? Um, okay. I mean, I do read books and I do live life, and I imagine things while I also experience life in the moment. So I don't think they're exclusive. Dr. Jordan Peterson's works. No, I am not familiar with those things. Do I create any sort of conscious divide between myself as a content creator in my life outside of social media or content creation? Mm, yeah, I'm still figuring that out. I feel like I feel like my relationship to social media has been really weird because all of this started as a passion project in some ways, just to record my books and to publish my book reviews. It wasn't something that I consciously started to potentially reach an audience. I was just doing it for my own tracking. I feel like now I don't use social media anymore for personal reasons. Yeah, I which has helped a lot. So now I only really see social media as a place to be a bit more intentional with um yeah, with interacting with content and to potentially create more content on my channel. So I don't really use social media anymore for personal reasons, and that helped a lot. I feel a bit ambivalent about treating social media as work. Um, yeah, because I don't want this to be a full time job. I think someone asked whether I do it full time. I don't. Um, yeah, I don't do it full time, but I have been a lot more serious. I think the term would be like what semi-professional or like s- professional hobbyist, which is a term I really find so strange. But I'm doing it a lot more seriously this time with a greater intention to actually provide meaningful content. So I think that's a huge shift in my approach because I used to make videos just for fun, or I used to make videos just for my own record, my own archiving, my own documentation, but now I do videos for another purpose. Did you study in YNC? Yes, I did. Oh, CG artist. Oh, not sure what I want to be good at except surviving. I really get that. I really feel that a lot. Yeah. I feel like for me, I'm pretty happy that I still have a barista position to go back to, because I feel like working as a barista was a really fulfilling time in my life that I could see myself doing. And then doing my content was very intellectually stimulating and also very fulfilling in some ways. So I felt it was a very good balance, even though financially it wasn't very like secure. Um, yeah, but that was a very good balance I had. Then and it wasn't and I didn't feel ambitious. And I think someone did comment on that video about being able to tell the difference between ambition in a corporate sense and self growth. I think it's very important to want to learn for yourself. I'm not saying that everyone has to learn more and learn more, but to have a curiosity about the world and to have an interest that you want to develop and to experience the world, I think that's something that everyone should have the resources to do. It's up to them to decide if they want to do it. Um, so yeah, really relate to that though, no ambition. I mean, I do have a very strong desire to want to learn as much as I can. I don't know whether that counts as ambition, but I definitely don't have as much of the career or corporate ambition anymore. Kind of feels hard to have that when you know about so many things in the world that are not going so well. Will I be doing YouTube long term, or am I just going to flow? Currently, I'm just doing things as they are. I hope to be able to do videos at least for the next year or so. Yeah, I mean, having a YouTube channel and uploading consistently has been a really good thing in terms of routine, but it also helps me clarify a lot of my thoughts in the process. Um, yeah, so I hope to keep this up. Mariana Matja's work. Matija? That one? Oh, I've not heard about that. I've not heard about this person, but that sounds really amazing. I'd love to check that out. Do my friends know about my online persona? Some of them have. Some of them, when my first video went viral, is when my first viral video went viral, some of them did text me and was like, oh, so you're an influencer now. And I'm like, I don't really know if I can call that. I call myself that. But luckily, I'm not a very social person, so luckily I don't really have a lot of people bugging me about it. Do I have a favorite Indonesian food that I miss a lot? Luckily for me, my family cooks a lot, so I don't really have very specific Indonesian foods that I miss. Um, yeah, but I would say just things in general. Like the way that the food is prepared in those like shops and like those like street side shops or like restaurants, it really is very different from how you prepare it at home. So I think I miss that kind of vibe. But the food themselves, like the food itself, I still get to eat a lot of them at home. Oh, Yoko. Hi, aren't you a Singaporean content creator? Oh, yes, the local Singapore Bicentennial lecture series. I have watched that by Tony. Yeah, I think Tony is a pretty. He has really very interesting points. I actually did. How do I say this? Like, I actually did learn some stuff from him back in the day. I actually did take some of his lessons as a student, so I am quite familiar with his lectures. And I would say a lot of them were really quite formative for me. Like a lot of his thoughts on Singapore has really helped me be a lot more critical about the way things are done here. Oh, the Thought Collective, yes. Oh, Noam Chomsky. Yes, I have been putting that on my TBR for a long time. So, do I look like Dongwoo from Infinite? A lot of people have said that I look like different K-pop boy group members. Strangely so. Thanks for all the comments, by the way. I'm so glad that so many of you have been wanting to watch my live stream. And thanks for like recommending stuff to me. There's just so many things that I also haven't seen and I also want to learn more about. So that's great. And thanks for all the greetings from different countries. Wow. Did I grow up in Indonesia? No, I did not. I grew up in Singapore. I was born and raised here, but I did go back pretty often. Hi from Hong Kong. Hi from Singapore. Any recommendation for fiction books? I would say, yeah, I say this a lot on my channel, but I don't really read a lot of fiction. However, if you do want to read Singaporean literature, uh, I would really recommend Ministry of Moral Panic by Amanda Lee Cole. Yeah, she's an amazing author, and I love the way she writes. Yeah. In terms of climate fiction, I guess I would really recommend The Ministry for the Future. It's a really thick book, but it had a lot of very interesting ideas. Yeah. Do I have people that I admire? That's a really good question. I can't really think of people off the top of my head. But I would say, okay, on a very casual basis, don't know whether anyone know about this K-pop singer, not K-pop, means Korean singer called IU. I mean, I've been a long time fan of hers, and I've always, admired her generosity and her humility. So I guess as an entertainer, a celebrity, she's someone that I really look up to in terms of like her artistic quality, but also her attitude towards her celebrity status. Yeah, I think that's one person that I can really think of. Yeah. Other than that, other people that I admire, uh, can't think of anyone unless I'm talking about like writers. There's this thinker, writer, activist called Adrienne Marie Brown. Her works are amazing. You should really, really like everyone should read her stuff because I think she provides really amazing resources and tools for organizing and to also think about care. Yeah. Political philosophy deals more with different matters that affect society on a macro and micro scale. Oh, okay, yeah. That seems like a. Now, I guess as long as I'm thinking about society, I guess that would be political philosophy. Wow, okay. All these comments. How do I feel about personality tests? I think um, I think they're fun, but they're not everything. I think personality tests are interesting when they give you perspective. I think in the end, everything is also about perspective, um, and it doesn't help to box things up into things. So I did do a video about personality tests a long time ago. I think like almost a year plus ago, really long time ago. And in it, I did talk about my zodiac signs, my horoscope signs, and I also talked about my MBTI. So I'm an Aries sun. So I I don't know whether that really means anything, but I definitely do vibe with the Aries energy a lot. Have I ever experienced climate anxiety and how do I deal with it? Yeah, so actually people did ask about this earlier on. Yeah, and I think a lot of people, so far in the live stream feel a lot of this as well about climate anxiety. It's a very real thing, and I'm glad that nowadays I do think that there are people who are much more willing to acknowledge it rather than to dismiss it. And I do think that these psychological consequences of being in a climate crisis is going to be the forefront as well. For example, if we look at history, we look at world wars, and we look at a lot of times of conflict and crisis, uh, the immediate consequences are often a lot of material costs and a lot of human lives and all that. But oftentimes, there's also a very much more prolonged period of psychological distress by the population. I think nowadays we are starting to really reckon with that, to reckon with how there is going to be a lot of psychological consequences, and also a very existential level, to the point where literally our environment is being destabilized right now, which is crazy because we've never had this at any point in human history. If you actually watch a lot of these videos or like read a lot of books about the ecology and read about like very scientific stuff about how climate has changed over the years, you realize that the history of the world really spans way far back, and human civilization has only really occupied a small area, small part of that, and now we're really starting to, yeah, like mass engineer or alter the environment in such a huge way that, in a way that the environment is now starting to really respond back in a very massive way. So I feel like our psychological preparedness is not really there yet, but there's no answer to it. I feel even current therapeutic models are not going to be able to catch up in time. So a lot of it has to be a bit more on the ball, a bit more adaptive, I would say. The good thing is that we can now source all these adaptive coping mechanisms together. And one thing that has really helped me is practicing a lot of, how do I say this? Practicing a lot of like present gratitude and focusing on my capacities for things. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed that book as well. A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety by Sarah Jacket Ray. Definitely is something that is a lot more accessible for someone who just started, for anyone who's just starting to feel a lot of climate anxiety. I feel now I'm at a point where I'm over the biggest despairing parts, um, and trying to work out solutions because I feel like that's the only way to move forward. Why are Gemini so hated? I'm actually a Gemini moon, so I don't hate on Geminis. Yeah, don't hate on Geminis. Oh, okay, I yeah, I don't want to say anything about Geminis. I don't do YouTube full time. No, I do it as like I don't know what, I don't want to call it a hobby. I just feel like a hobby doesn't really quite cut it. I do it part time, I guess. In terms of wealth, if we are already in the high 90 percentile globally, how much of our lifestyle are we willing to give up to the people who have less? This is a very good question. Extremely good. I feel like, yes, I really feel like it ties back to the whole nature, relating to nature aspect. So I want to really acknowledge and also encourage people, isn't acknowledge the indigenous way of living, indigenous way of life. And this could be in any sort of form in your own country or community. In Singapore, there are people from the like sort of orang asli, like lineage, and also like many different people of Malay ethnicity that have come to Singapore from much earlier on and have lived on the islands for a really long time. So, each of your countries or anywhere you live, there have been indigenous people who have really been staying there for a long time and have lived at a relatively sort of in a much more sort of cooperative way with nature. And I feel like we're only starting to really recognize that and to move back towards that and to see these people as the light forward. I feel like for the people in the wealthy percentage, especially people who live in cities, I do feel like a lot of our desire for wealth, a lot of our greed stems from insecurity, from this incessant um, feeling of like not having enough, and that's why people want more and more and more. But if we start to move towards the notion that the earth is enough and that we have enough, that we have everything that we need, and that nature provides, and that people are kind and generous, and we start to center on inclusive societies and also a respect for the environment, then I feel like it would be possible to convince people to live with less. I mean, in my degrowth video, I also talked about the rise of minimalism and slow living. I do believe that there is a way to convince more people who are living in much more affluent countries to become a lot more connected. Um, to become a lot more connected to this sort of thinking of like being much closer to the land and not wanting to seek out more in order to fill a certain void, which is why I talked a little bit more about how I feel like spirituality is the next step in thinking about climate crisis, because people are only going to be moved by a much more profound experience. People are not going to be moved just because you tell them to consume less, unfortunately. Have I received any backlash from my content? Yes, I have. I feel like this is, no matter what you do, no matter what content you put out there, it is always going to be the case that people will give you comments and people will give you feedback. And I think one of the difficulties I faced was being able to discern between feedback that was constructive, and basically feedback that was, a bit more malicious. One thing that really helped was understanding that the internet works in a way that is a bit fragmented. So someone who might have watched one video of mine, there is no obligation for them to watch all my other videos and to form a fuller picture of myself. So if someone makes a certain judgment or criticism based on one video, I think it's completely valid. And it has really helped to sort of think about the comments in that way. How do I say this? Like understanding that I'm also not perfect, that I can't provide every single correct stance in my video, but also understanding that the audience sometimes also make a lot of assumptions based on a singular experience. So it's both ways, it's like a negotiation of both ways. And from then, the constructive feedback, I would want to respond in a much more like intentional way. Yeah, but so far I haven't really experienced a lot of like harsh criticism because I don't think I am being too absolutist with my stance. I do think I'm more of someone that just wants to get people to think about things in their own way and to sort of question their own assumptions about things, not me trying to, coerce people to feel a certain way. Maybe that's why. Deforestation in Malaysia. I don't think Malaysians should feel guilty. I think the way that I think about it is that the era of 1950s till now, it was imperative for all economies to grow. And even though there was pushback, like people questioning whether economic growth was really that good, the fact is that for survival's sake, countries had to do whatever they could do, and that was very unfortunate. So I don't think that you should feel individually guilty, um, because guilt is about the history, right? I mean, now it's like we have to think about what we can do moving forward. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's really tough because yeah, it's very easy to feel into like a personal responsibility for all these things. I feel like especially if it happened in the past, it's very hard to take accountability for something that the authorities or the government um, sort of made a final decision in. When I get a master's degree, okay, I'm really intimidated by formal education. So I don't. I guess I have to question that. Will I get a master's? Hmm. Okay, I think some people have asked similar questions, thoughts on school environment, self-teaching, if I've been abroad. So I did answer some of those questions earlier. Um, well, thanks for the comment, Kami. Yeah, I'm really glad that there are a lot of people from Southeast Asia who are watching. Yeah, and I want to encourage more of y'all to like make videos too. I think it'd be super cool if we can have like a Southeast Asian sort of like community of people talking about all these issues. I think that would be amazing, and I'll get to learn as well a lot more about Southeast Asian perspectives because I know more about Singapore because that's what I'm much more immediately interested in. Yeah, the ones benefiting those in power. It's that's really difficult. Yeah, there's really no incentive for the people who are benefiting to really change anything. Yeah, I kind of feel like if we keep throwing punches at them, it is a bit difficult. For me, what my approach is now is to try to reach people who I can reach. So that would be people, say, in similar positions as me, or people who might feel a bit more skeptical about issues, or might, yeah, things like that. So I feel like instead of feeling so angry at all these rich people, which I think is completely valid, I still feel angry at rich people all the time. But it's also about sort of balancing between a critique of the people that are in power, but also boosting, as in also kind of coupling that with efforts in reaching out to people that are much more who actually have to be mobilized in some ways, I guess, both ways. And I do know that there's a tendency for a lot of infighting with people uh, with regards to like activism and advocacy. That's a very unfortunate thing, but it's also really because all these people who are in power and all these institutions seem so unbeatable that people start to enact really high expectations on fellow activists and fellow advocates, which is something I hope people don't, yeah, do so much. Oh no, that was my camera. Oh. Ecosia. I mean, so far I've seen really good things about Ecosia. Ecosia? I don't know. Are there bad things about it? I'm not too sure. Oh, thanks for that, Han Mira Mantri. Oh no, you don't have to be well read enough to start one. I feel like we should all be talking about all sorts of topics in a much more like casual way. I think that's sort of the amazing thing about YouTube and all these platforms. Yeah, that we can make things a lot more casual. Yeah. Uh, What would you recommend to is it Sec 4 student looking to get into reading non-fic? So I guess non-fic, I would recommend something a bit more fun. A much more fun book that I read recently is this one called Entangled Life. I have it here. And it's about mushrooms and fungi, but it's also about like ecology in general, which is really fun. This really reminded me of like really fun science documentaries, so I would recommend this book. But there are also a lot of very interesting books to read. Uh, Depends on what you're interested in, really. Yeah. Is how affordable housing. Oh, that's a really huge topic of, yeah, a conversation topic to have in Singapore. Almost every week there is a online debate about housing, the housing market in Singapore. Um, I know a lot of people tend to portray the public housing system in Singapore to be an extremely good thing. It is good. I mean, it has been good. It has been providing a lot of affordable housing to Singaporeans for a long time. But also there are a lot of caveats, and it's also very much exclusive to married couples, heterosexual couples, basically. Oh, hi. Thanks so much for joining the live stream. Thank you. Khadija actually gave me a shout out super early on in my YouTube career, and that really helped expose my content to a lot of people. Thank you so much for that. Do I have favorite painters or photographers? I have this favorite artist called Namjoon Park. He's this like South Korean uh, installation artist, and I really love the way that he regarded technology and he regarded intimacy that's mediated through digital technologies. So I really, really love his work. I also really, 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 really love what's this person's name? This Japanese artist as well. Uh, Let me just try and find. This artist called Chiharu Shiota. Yeah, this Japanese artist. She's also like a installation artist, I think. Yeah, and I really, really love her work. So my my kitten just woke up, and I think it's time to feed her. So I can't stay for too long. Hi. Oh, here you go. Oh, oh my god. Oh, hi. Oh, are you hungry? Can you hear her purring? I think she's hungry. Okay, so I think I have to go soon because I have to feed her. Right? Say hi. Yeah, I put a bell on her because she's still really small now. She tends to run around the place a lot, so I can't find her. Um, yeah. Oh no, please don't bite the wire. Are you hungry? She's only about 4 months old, so she's really, really young. Why are you showing them your butt? Don't show them your butt. Yeah. Yes, okay, so I think I'll end the live stream here. Thanks so much for joining me, everyone. And yeah, thank you for all the comments and all the questions. There are also some that I didn't manage to answer. There's just so many that happened. Yeah. So thanks so much for joining me. I really didn't expect so many to be joining me today. Yeah, so yes, I don't know that I'll be able to upload a video this week. It has been really busy. But if not, I would be more than happy to do more live streams moving forward since I know that there are a lot of you that are interested. So yeah, thanks so much. And see you all. Thanks again for the 10K. It's really amazing. I can't believe it, even until now. So thanks so much. And see y'all. Yes, it's time for her late night dinner. Yes. Okay, bye.